as your father is assembling his team, as maybe Caroline Levitt is looking at the new press briefing room chart, maybe it's time to reorder that chart and maybe take away some people's seats.
So we're going to break some news here because I literally had this conversation.
In a brazen but totally expected display of hypocrisy, the so-called party of free speech and free press and free expression is at it again. Because during a recent conversation with right-wing commentator Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire, Donald Trump Jr. publicly revealed that his father, Donald Trump, the incoming president, is seriously considering stripping White House access and credentials and press room seats from media that he believes has been too critical of him in the past and giving them instead to friendlier alternative media like the Daily Wire. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, this is, again, totally expected, but extremely frustrating given the claims that not just right-wingers, but Knowles and Don Jr. have publicly made, much like Elon Musk, for being free speech absolutists and free speech warriors. Except always without fail, it turns out that no, they actually just want to control who gets to speak and who doesn't. So we're going to play this clip and unpack it together.
But I wonder now, as your father is assembling his team, as maybe Caroline Levitt is looking at the new press briefing room chart, maybe it's time to reorder that chart and maybe take away some people's seats.
So we're going to break some news here because I literally had this conversation. I was flying back. I was on the plane, I guess, with my father. I think it was coming back from the SpaceX launch with Elon last week. And I was sitting there and we were talking about like the podcast world and some of our friends and Rogan and guys like you and, me to a lesser extent. I wouldn't be able to get a seat. That would be nepotism or whatever the hell. I'd be indicted again. I'd have to do more congressional testimony, so I'll pass. But we actually had this conversation about given how the media has behaved. I mean, you brought up the New York Times. You saw the fact check of Bobby Kennedy talking about the different ingredients in Fruit Loops. And it was like, no, it's exactly the same as Canada, except we use yellow dye number 5 here instead of orange, carrots. And we use purple dye number 2,376 instead of blueberry extract. And I'm like, that's your fact check? It's the same, but for these really toxic chemicals that are banned in, dozens of countries. I don't get it. But we had the conversation about opening up the press room to a lot of these independent journalists. Why should, if the New York Times has lied, they've been adverse to everything, they're functioning as the marketing arm of the Democrat Party, why not open it up to people who have larger viewerships, stronger followings? It's not like the New York, how much money are they losing a year? The Washington Post, lost 70 to 45 to $70 million. Doesn't seem like they're a great success. So just because they've been there longer, it's like the way Congress functions. You get a committee, not because you know anything about banking, but.
So there you go. A couple of things to note. Again, the self-serving narcissistic nature of the Trump family. It's not just Donald Trump. Don Jr. is much the same way. Notice how he says maybe my podcast triggered, right? Because he really wants to own the libs. It's all he cares about. Maybe we could replace the New York Times or the Washington Post. And then he seemingly has a sense of self-awareness. It's like, well, no, that would be nepotism, as if that wasn't the animating principle of much of his father's first term. Don Jr.'s brother-in-law, Jared Kushner, and his sister, Ivanka, they received official White House positions. They were senior advisors to the president of the United States when Trump was president. Jared Kushner was the de facto shadow secretary of state. They wielded enormous power and in an official White House role. We've never seen anything like that in any White House. It was a brazen display of corruption and nepotism. And they were wholly unqualified for the roles. It would have been bad enough if Ivanka and Jared were actually qualified to do what they do. It would still be very inappropriate for Donald Trump to give them official roles in his White House, but they didn't even have the credibility, experience, or expertise to serve in those roles to begin with. So Don Jr., taking the place of the New York Times or the Washington Post or CBS in the Trump White House press room would actually be a 100%, that would be an absolute, that would be commensurate with everything that Donald Trump is. That wouldn't be out of character at all. That's one thing. Number two, again, note this idea that, it's really, the New York Times has lied in the past and they've been critical. And even if I grant that at face value, this idea that the New York Times has lied. Okay, what about Fox? How would Michael Knowles and Don Jr. and Fox News and just right-wingers and MAGA Republicans and Trump have felt if President Biden, over the span of these past 4 years, said, you know what, Fox, I think you guys are too critical. I think you guys lie a lot. As a matter of fact, he could point to the $787 million that Fox had to pay to Dominion Voting Systems to settle. It was an unprecedented defamation settlement. And we learned from evidence during discovery that Fox on-air personalities, Fox editors, Fox producers, Fox executives knew that Fox was knowingly signal boosting the lies about the 2020 election. It was basically a $787 million loyalty tithe to Donald Trump. Unprecedented. CNN's never had to do this. CBS, MSNBC. So Biden could effortlessly have pointed to that and said, to the extent that media lies at all, Fox lies more egregiously and more expensively than anybody. And so as a consequence of that, given the fact that you all are objectively bigger liars than CNN, MSNBC, and others, and you've lied about the election and you've lied about me, I'm going to take away your credentials. I'm going to take away your White House press seats. I'm going to take away your White House access. How would MAGA Republicans, conservatives, Michael Knowles, Daily Wire, Don Jr., and Donald Trump have reacted to that? How would Fox News have reacted to that? Well, they would have been apoplectic because they would have understandably seen that as a weaponization of federal authority, even though it's much more defensible to punish Fox in that way than the New York Times. So again, the stunning hypocrisy, and I say stunning in the sense like it's just so brazen, not unexpected, is part and parcel of the MAGA movement. And the other thing I want to say before I play this next clip is note that Don Jr. just didn't come up with this in a vacuum. He was teed up for it by Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire, because Michael Knowles also wants Donald Trump and MAGA to troll and own the libs, to punish them. He doesn't want MAGA or Republicans or Trump to adhere to a single set of principles and standards. He wants to simultaneously claim that he and Trump and MAGA and Republicans and the right, that they defend free speech while knowingly violating that principle when it's convenient for them politically. He enjoys it. The shamelessness is their superpower. Now, I mentioned Fox, and what's interesting is Fox also kind of weighed in on this. Fox News hosts, including Will Cain, who is the co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend. He's part of the second string lineup. And he is also jubilant at the notion of the Trump White House removing credentials and access from legacy media or from other elements of the media and replacing it with him and Megyn Kelly and Joe Rogan and others.
So we know that it's a coveted 49-seat limit, and it's the White House Correspondents Association that determines the seating, even though it's the White House itself that determines the credentials. So talk to me about the potential for a changing landscape there in that White House press briefing room.
Pretty exciting. There might be a White House press briefing seat for the Will Cain Show, of course, which is on foxnews.com, Fox News YouTube, and Fox News Facebook. The truth is, most of us, though, from the Will Cain Show to Joe Rogan to Megyn Kelly and so forth, we don't have large built-out news departments, reporters and journalists set to sit into that room. And I can't imagine seeing Megyn and Joe moving to D.C. and ready to ask questions directly. But they've earned it. That's the point I think that's being alluded to here, or we're getting to. And as long as they want to invest and build out, they've earned it. You know, Emily, Jim Vandehei did his thing the other day.
So here's the thing. You could make an argument, I suppose, that given the changing landscape of the media, it might make sense that for major podcasts or major elements of alternative media to have access to the White House, given that, I mean, it is true that Joe Rogan, more people listen to Joe Rogan than CNN or Fox or others as well. I don't deny the popularity. The problem is it's not about expanding access, which again, that's a defensible argument. Although you could also say, well, Fox and CNN and MSNBC, at least they are, operating under some degree of journalistic credibility. We may clearly disagree as to how consistently they reach that metric. Fox, again, having to pay $787 million to settle a defamation case with Dominion. But in theory, Fox and CNN and MSNBC and CBS and others are constrained in ways that Joe Rogan, Tim Pool, Megyn Kelly, Will Cain, and others are not. So I see the argument both ways. But the issue is they're not even talking about expanding access. What they're talking about is actually narrowing it and replacing critical media under the guise that, well, this critical media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they're hemorrhaging viewers, they're hemorrhaging readers. They're not popular. We want to get the word out to maximize coverage. Well, it would be one thing if they threatened to do that and then said, you know what, but to show that we're not trying to silence our critics, popular liberal and progressive Hassan Piker, Destiny, Mehdi Hassan with Zateo, Pod Save America, Ezra Klein's, New York Times, Josiah from Pondering Politics, Luke Beasley, Midas Touch. We'll give them access to replace the hemorrhaging, legacy media. But note that that's not what Don Jr. proposed. Note that that's not what Will Cain proposed. Note that that's not what Michael Knowles proposed. What they want to do is remove critical media from White House access to try to stymie the criticisms in the future, make it harder to criticize them because they have less access, and also to punish them for the critical media that they've done in the past. And so again, I want you to think, how would all of these people have reacted if President Biden had said, you know what, Fox, screw you. I'm going to keep CNN and MSNBC and Washington Post and New York Times because you know what? None of them had to pay nearly $1 billion in a defamation settlement because they were knowingly lying about me and Dominion voting systems and the 2020 election. Not only was it a big unprecedented lie, it was a big unprecedented lie about elections and government and the peaceful transfer of power, something fundamental, things that are fundamental to the core of this country. So I'm eminently justified. I'm far more justified than you could ever dare be or dare dream of in taking away your access. And I'm going to do it anyway. Imagine if Biden had said that, how the right would have reacted. It's important to keep this in your back pocket, not because pointing this out will change Will Cain's mind or Don Jr.'s mind or Michael Knowles' mind. Don Jr. seems pretty stupid. Will Cain and Michael Knowles, they're not stupid. They understand that they are appealing to and continuing a double standard. They know that they would be furious or would be performatively outraged at a bare minimum if the shoe were on the other foot. But they don't care because as long as they're wearing the shoes, who cares about whether in a hypothetical timeline that a more ruthless Democrat willing to throw some elbows would play by the same rules? They have every reason to believe that would never happen. Their shamelessness is their superpower. But the reason this is important is not only in theory could Brian Tyler Cohen or Destiny or Pod Save America or whatever use this to their advantage, and next time they're in a debate with Piers Morgan or Will Cain or Michael Knowles, flip the script. It would have the benefit of exposing whoever's watching to the hypocrisy. And I do think there's at least some value there. There are some people still in this world, maybe only dozens or hundreds or thousands, who are disgusted by shameless breaches of standards and shameless hypocrisy. It still does offend people, maybe not dyed-in-the-wool MAGA cultists, but there are some people on the margins who are like, oh my God, the so-called party of free speech is thirsty, horny, salivating over the notion of taking away White House access from critical media. They're snowflakes that bad. They're so thin-skinned and weak to that extent. And it could help change. It either could help change hearts and minds or change them outright. So keep that in the back of your mind and in the back of your pocket to drop on somebody the next time it's relevant. And as for whether or not Trump will follow through, we'll find out in time. But I promise you this, if he does it, you will not see outrage or a principled stand from the right on this. The Daily Wire will not be upset. Fox will not be upset. Newsmax will not be upset. Tim Pool will not be upset. Elon Musk will not be upset. These so-called free speech absolutists will cheer and celebrate the notion of Donald Trump and MAGA punishing the critical media. Watch out for it. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.